premiere of Legacy, the first of a three-part series highlighting the architecture, art, and history of the Cathedral Basilica of Saints Peter and Paul. And Father Lavin shares his most embarrassing moments while saying Mass. All this and Dr. John Kelly next on Catholic Magazine.
With your window on your world, this is Catholic Magazine. Good evening, everyone. I'm Paul Perello.
Good evening from me. I'm Pat Shelton. I'm so glad you're with us tonight. Father Pat Lavin will be here later on with an absolutely precious segment that you'll be glad you stayed tuned for.
Also on tonight's program, we'll have a look at the work of the Campaign for Human Development, and also Dr. John Kelly will be along with Checkup.
There is a magnificent edifice in Philadelphia where thousands have worshiped over the years, and still other thousands of visitors have stopped to pray and admire its beauty. I'm speaking of the Cathedral Basilica of Saints Peter and Paul, and tonight we begin a three-part series on the cathedral entitled Legacy.
Welcome to our first edition. We're going to be taking some extraordinary tours of unusual places, and we're going to see some familiar places in ways very few people get to see them. I'm C. Adrienne Murphy, and I'll be your host. I'm standing in front of the Cathedral of Saints Peter and Paul in Philadelphia. This building, one of the most architecturally eminent in Philadelphia, was begun in 1846 and completed in 1864. It was built under the tenure of three different archbishops from three different nations: Francis Kenrick, born in Ireland, St. John Newman from Bohemia, and Archbishop James Wood, who was born here in Philadelphia. There are four statues in niches on the front of the cathedral. One is Sacred Heart, to whom the cathedral was consecrated in 1846, Mary, the Immaculate Conception, patroness of the United States, and Saints Peter and Paul, patrons of the cathedral. The building is made from brownstone, which was quarried in Connecticut and northern New Jersey. Now we're going to go inside and meet Lou Ferrero, who's become very involved with the history of the cathedral.
I became involved with the history of the cathedral back in 1989. I've always been a parishioner, and my mother before me, my family goes back maybe 90 years in the cathedral parish. I've always had an interest in the artwork and where pieces of art have gone after major renovations, and stories that have been told me by parishioners and older parishioners especially, about where artwork has disappeared to or now is relocated in another church. Well, in 1989, I realized it was the 125th anniversary of the cathedral being built and opened in 1864. So I seriously started my research, and I guess I was surprised to learn that the original cathedral had very little artwork. In the center of the dome, above the stained glass windows, is a large circular painting of the Assumption, done by Constantino Brumidi. Brumidi did almost all of the frescoes in the U.S. Capitol building. He worked there 26 years of his life. And in 1863, he completed many paintings in the cathedral, including many fresco works. The frescoes are now gone through many of the renovations of the cathedral. Its last major renovation was in 1956-57. And the major part of that renovation was installing the new main altar. The altar is mainly of white Italian marble, and the baldachin on top of marble columns has entablature and capitals of cast bronze. That's at the top of the columns. The dome over the baldachin is of massive bronze plates. The whole is about 38 feet tall. On the ceiling, on the underside of the baldachin, is an Italian mosaic installed also in 1957, and its main feature is of the Holy Spirit in the form of a dove in the center. It also has plaques or crests representing Saints Peter and St. Paul. Behind the altar is a screen which was installed later in the 1960s, and on top of that screen are two bronze statues of Saints Peter and St. Paul. On the four outside corners of the baldachin or canopy over the altar are 10-foot tall angels carved in marble.
That bronze dome is a familiar and beloved sight to many Philadelphia Catholics. Thank you, Lou. Next week, we're going to climb to some extraordinary heights with Tim Callanan, whose family has designed, installed, and maintained the stained glass windows in the cathedral for 4 generations. See you then.
And we look forward to seeing those further installments of Legacy. And Legacy is brought to you through the courtesy of the Joseph Grayton Institute at Old St. Joseph's National Shrine. Up next on this edition of Catholic Magazine, concerned about fat in your diet, concerned about that fat-free milk or perhaps those 2% fat-free hot dogs. Well, here's Dr. John Kelly with Checkup on Fat-Free.
Let's see what we have in the fridge today. Low-fat milk, fat-free cheese, 82% fat-free turkey bologna, 80% fat-free beef bologna, 33% less fat turkey franks. There's a lot of talk about fat these days, and for good reason. We all know that high-fat diets are good for your health, and I've been preaching to keep your percentage of calories of fat in your diet to less than 25%. How do you determine what percentage of calories of fat in your diet? By reading labels carefully. You see, we're more concerned about the percentage of calories of fat in your diet, more so than the percentage by weight of fat. 2% milk is really 2% fat by weight, not by fat calories. To determine the percentage of calories of fat in your diet, we need to know a few things. 1 gram of fat equals 9 calories. So if you look at a product and determine how many grams of fat there are per serving, multiply that number by 9, and that'll give you the number of calories of fat per serving. Take that number, divide it by the total number of calories per serving, multiply that by 100, and that'll give you the percentage of calories of fat in your diet. Sounds pretty complicated, doesn't it? Let's go through a few examples. Let's start with this home-style snack. The label here says that 11 grams per serving of fat. So that's 11 times 9 grams of fat, or 9 calories per gram of fat, equals 99 calories of fat per serving. So divide this over total number of calories per serving, 190. Multiply this by 100, and that gives you a whopping 52% fat. Nice healthy snack, right? Next, let's look at low-fat milk. 2% milk fat, huh? Wrong. 5 grams of fat per serving, that's 45, math major. Divided by 120 calories per serving, total calories. Multiply this by 100 and you get 38% fat. Low-fat milk. Next, let's look at this light product. Light beef bologna, 80% fat-free, not 5 grams of fat per serving, 45, again. Divided by 70 calories total per serving. Multiply this number by 100 and you get 64% fat. Now this is 20% fat by weight, not by calories. If this is the light brand, I hate to see the original brand. Let's see what other health food we have here. Turkey franks. Now this product is 33% less fat. 9 grams of fat per serving. Jeez. So 81 calories of fat per serving. Divided by the total number of calories per serving, that's 110. This 33% less fat product is 74% fat. Part of a nice health diet. As you can see, the labels are very misleading. What we're seeing is percent by weight, not by calories. The government is starting to crack down on this practice, but they're far from completion in their task. So for now, try to learn how to do these calculations in your head for a quick guesstimate. Don't trust everything you read. Remember, a low-fat diet has many, many benefits. It can cut down on premature aging, obesity, heart disease, and just give you a general sense of well-being. And that, folks, is 100% true. For Checkup, I'm Dr. John, 14% Fat Kelly.
Always good advice from the good doctor. Make sure you read those labels. Recently, I had the opportunity to learn about the work of the Campaign for Human Development. when Father Joseph Hacala, Executive Director of the campaign, stopped by our Catholic Magazine studios. St. Paul teaches us that if we want peace, we must work for justice. One such organization striving not just for justice, but for hope for the poor is the Campaign for Human Development, which for more than 20 years has been assisting communities to move out of poverty and build solidarity between rich and poor. Here to discuss the work of CHD, where it has been and where it is going, is Father Joseph Hacala, Executive Director for the Campaign for Human Development. Father, welcome to our program.
Thank you, Paul. It's good to be here.
Father, for those at home who may not be certain what exactly the CHD is all about, why don't you explain what the CHD is, what it does, and where it's going?
The Campaign for Human Development, put very simply, Paul, is the domestic anti-poverty campaign of the United States Catholic bishops. It was begun in 1969, really as a response to the challenge and the opportunity of the Second Vatican Council, which encouraged the church to become more involved in the problems of the world. And it picked up really, I think, that very beautiful phrase at the beginning of the best known of the documents of Vatican II, the document on the church in the modern world, which says that the joys, the hopes, the griefs, and the struggles of the people of our time are also the joys, the hopes, the griefs, the struggles of those of us who call ourselves Christians. And so in direct response to this, and in reading the signs of the times in the late 60s, a time, I might suggest, not unlike our own, with inequality in our society and poverty, the bishops wanted to respond and to complement the many good works that they'd been doing for many years, works like Catholic Charities, individual outreach and providing services to people, the work of our Catholic school system or the Catholic healthcare system, for instance. And they looked to create a program that would deal not only with the surface problems of poverty, but would really get underneath those and deal with the underlying issues. And so they created this wonderful program, really with a threefold mission. One, to provide funds through the generosity of American Catholics to empower poor persons. And secondly, they built in a very strong education for justice component. And thirdly, it was their hope then that they could help build bridges of solidarity between poor and non-poor in our church and in our society. And over the last 22 years, it has indeed been one of the most successful programs in the Catholic Church. I like to call it the best program in the Catholic Church from my perspective as Executive Director. Through the generosity of American Catholics, it has raised $175 million in support of more than 3,000 grassroots self-help projects.
Now, we should mention that these self-help projects are not necessarily indicative to inner city areas. They are all across the country. And before we started taping here, some of the work from the campaign has actually started right here in Philadelphia back in 1971, you were telling me.
That's correct. At that time, Cardinal Crowe here was the president of the Bishops' Conference, and he was originally a very strong supporter of the campaign, as his successors have been, and as Cardinal Bevilacqua continues to be today. And I was a young Jesuit seminarian back in 1970, 1972, serving at St. Joseph's Prep here in Philadelphia. And at that time, we were doing a lot of community outreach, and I was also involved with a local community organization, at that time called the North Central Community Organization. And we received one of the initial grants in 1975 from the Campaign for Human Development. And it's a great source of pride for me to come back to Philadelphia, to go down in that area, and we were actually organizing persons in not only in the Jesu parish, but also in the Cathedral parish, south of Spring Garden there. And just yesterday I drove by 18 homes on 20th Street coming north there in the Calla Hill area of elderly senior citizens who now have a home because of displacement that went on in the area at that time. And that's really been the philosophy of CHD over the years, not to provide so much a handout to people, but really a hand up to provide people with long-term employment opportunities and housing, and really hope from a Christian perspective, because CHD is more than a funding agency. It is really the Catholic Church working for justice. It is really our faith alive, as you suggested in your opening remarks.
In the minute that we have left, Father, in a few weeks there will be a collection that will be taken, a second collection at throughout the Archdiocese of Philadelphia. What would the Campaign for Human Development like to see people donate to this collection to help you in your work?
Right. Well, we invite their generosity. The needs are very great. Last year, the Catholics here contributed over $250,000, and we returned about $150,000 to fund 5 projects in the Archdiocese of Philadelphia last year. And while we raised $12 million nationally last year at this collection that's taken up at Thanksgiving time, the needs are serious around our country. And so I really thank you for their generosity, but I really invite their increased contribution to this wonderful, wonderful program of the United States Catholic Bishops to empower God's poor, as you suggest, to bring about peace and justice in our society.
Father Joseph Hacala, the Executive Director of the Campaign for Human Development, our guest on this edition of Catholic Magazine. Thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you, Paul.
Stay with us. There's still much more ahead on this edition of Catholic Magazine.
Mrs. Washburn, I'm Gerald Fry's mother.
Oh, don't you work nights?
I traded shifts. Mrs. Washburn, about Gerald. I wish I could help him learn better, but I'm no genius.
Well, you don't have to do the homework, but ask to see it.
Let him show off what he learned.
Praise him more. Show you care.
You think we got a chance here?
A good chance. Show me a parent who really cares, and I'll show you a kid who can learn.
The Christian is certainly called to pray with others, but he must also enter into his room to pray to the Father in secret. Indeed, according to the teaching of the Apostle Paul, he should pray without ceasing.
Please, God, don't let us be late. God, let this car start. Thank God.
You know how to pray. Now think about what you're praying for. There's power in prayer. A message from your Catholic neighbors.
Recycling all our Sunday papers would save over 500,000 trees a week. Recycle. It's the everyday way to save the world.
We welcome your comments, suggestions, and donations and encourage you to write us at Catholic Magazine, St. Charles Seminary, 1000 East Wynwood Road, Overbrook, PA, 19096, or call us during regular business hours at 668-9842.
I remember as a child driving with my family down country roads and seeing old barns with mail pouch tobacco painted along the sides. Well, there's more to old barns than mail pouch tobacco ads, as we'll see now as we watch New England Barns.
We get the word barn from the Anglo-Saxonized beren, B-E-R-E-N, B-E-R-E meaning barley and A-E-R-N meaning a close place, thus a building for storing grain. In 1753, a man named Lewis Evans penned this line: "It is pretty to behold our back settlements where the barns are as large as palaces, while the owners live in log huts, a sign of thrifty farming." And it's true. When the Dutch and the French, the Swedes, the Poles, and the Italians, Slovaks, Finns, and Danes settled our land and built their barns, they didn't build them like the small ones they left behind. They built big ones to match the hopes and the plans for life in the New World. When they designed their homes, they dashed off a quick sketch. When they designed their barns, they sat up for nights, planning and expressing themselves in design, knowing the welfare of the family depended on the comfort of the cattle. Farming changes and old barns vanish, but the biggest, most expensive thing on a farm will always be the barn. We look at an old barn and call it weather-beaten. They'd look at an old barn and call it weather-cured. We would say it nestles into a hill. They would say it was well into the weather. Maybe the farmer of the 1700s built his barn from William Payne's book, The Carpenter's Pocket Manual with Complete Directions for Building a Barn. Here's an excerpt. Strength and convenience are the two most essential requisites in building, the due proportion and correspondence of parts constituting a beauty that always first attracts the eye. And where the beauty is wanting, carving and decoration only excite disgust. It was true of the time. We look up and admire a weather vane and assume it was always there. But in fact, early farmers following their religion did not decorate barns. To put an iron eagle or a spanking horse atop a barn's roof would have been seen as showy and vulgar. They eventually did take advantage of the height of a barn roof to track the wind, but the first weather vane was a weather sock, not unlike the aviation wind sock we can still spot. We love old barns, yet we tear them down. We love them because they are old, yet still stand, but we have trouble explaining the word antique to our children. It is a symbol of something past, but age had nothing to do with it, and condition is beside the point. We do not explain this love, we simply acquire it. Maybe we love old barns because while we build for distinction and decoration, they built with plainness, for life and death. Early Greeks built with marble, early Americans with wood, but both architectural forms were founded on simplicity. And early Americans were all rural and built a barn regardless of primary profession. From Travels in the Confederation, 1783, we get this. I built those stalls and that shed there. I am a barber and a doctor. I'm a weaver, a shoemaker, a farrier, a wheelwright, a farmer, and a gardener. And when it cannot be helped, I'm a soldier. All those lives built around a barn.
Some beautiful country up in New England. Here gracing our landscape right now at Catholic Magazine is Father Pat Lavin, who tells us, among other things, God has a great sense of humor.
Monday's child is fair of face, and Tuesday's child is full of grace, and Wednesday's child is full of woe, and Thursday's child has far to go, and Friday's child is loving and giving, and Saturday's child works hard for a living, and the child born on the Sabbath day is bonny and blithe and good and gay. While the Eucharistic liturgy is the central prayer of our church, there are times when this holy affair takes on a sense of Sunday's child. I had the privilege of going to Rome for the elevation of Cardinal Bevilacqua, and since Monsignor Charles Elmer of the Casa invited me to distribute communion to the diplomatic corps attached to the Holy See, I had a grand seat. As the procession entered into the square, the winds whipped off of the Tiber down the Villa della Conciliazione into the piazza, and the Pope bowed to the altar to incense, and a zucchetta was whipped right off of his head, and the Monsignor went running after it. And along with his zucchetta were the mitres and the zucchettas of the Cardinale, and people were running all over in the wind trying to catch them to bring them back to their proper owner. It was a fantastic experience. I watched the altar cloth get ripped right off of the altar, and a palm tree, believe it or not, fell down and hit the ground right behind the Chinese cardinal who had been imprisoned for so many years. And my mind wandered to the headlines of the newspapers that would say, Chinese cardinal felled by palm tree in the center of St. Peter's Square. It was a beautiful experience and a touch of God's sense of humor. And I must admit there are times when I've had similar experiences happen to me while I was celebrating Eucharist, but not quite on such a grand scale.
I will never forget the time that I was taping a Mass for television, and half of the congregation was made up of my family, and the other half was made up of the parents of the beautiful children that made up the choir. They sang like angels. They were very, very good. As we approach the Lord's Prayer, I hear a large gush come like Mount Vesuvius, erupting, and all of the eyes of the people in the congregation, my niece, my nephew, my brother, the eyes just turn towards the choir, and there you see on the top rung of the choir this beautiful child who was bringing up everything that she had for supper and possibly even lunch onto the heads of the kids below her. She had such force that the spray went across the front of the altar and fell in 3 different places. And there I stood with my hands open in prayer, and I'm saying to myself, oh God, don't let me smell it or I'll get sick myself. You know, I felt so bad for the child, but at the same time, I'm saying, how am I going to cover this up? And then came time for the kiss of peace, and I go around the altar, and as I pass the plants that are there, the wire from my microphone gets caught in the plants. The next thing you hear is bang! And there I am, shaking hands with the people in the front row, and all of a sudden I feel a tug on my right pocket. My vestments go up in the air, and there's tug, tug, tug. And finally, I turned around, and there, 10 feet away from me, is the altar boy stooped over with the wire connected to my microphone, slinging in the air, trying to get rid of the plant that is halfway between he and me, stuck in the wire. Oh, by the time I got back to the altar, I said, could anything else go wrong? The altar boy's laughing, the people in the congregation are biting on their lips, and I finished the Mass, and I see the floor manager give me a stretch, throw me 3 fingers. It means I have to talk off the top of my head for 3 minutes, and so I boldly looked straight into the camera, and I said,
if you can't laugh in church, you can't laugh anywhere. And it's the first time I ever got hooked up with a flower pot and carried it with me. And the congregation broke out into full laughter, and the embarrassment of a child was covered up by the foolishness of a priest who took a plan out for a walk. I want to thank you for the many letters that you sent to me at that time, where you shared with me the most embarrassing moment that you've had in church. And I also have to thank God that He tells us not to leave our senses of humor at home, and that we should be open to one another on this journey of faith, caring, and to be open to the awe, to the wonder, and to the surprise of life. Until you invite me into your home again, I'm Father Pat Lavin, so keep on with your song.
I don't think there's ever a dull moment in Father Pat's life. A quick note for you. The women's group of St. Andrew the Apostle Parish in Gibbsboro, New Jersey, invites you to celebrate women's spirituality on Saturday, November 21st. To register, call 609-346-2731 or 609-627-8403. Registration deadline is November 14th.
That wraps up this edition of Catholic Magazine. Until next week, I'm Paul Pirillo.
And I'm Pat Shelton. See you next time.
Good night.
Set materials for Catholic Magazine provided by Tague Lumber Incorporated, serving the Delaware Valley for over 75 years. And by John Wanamaker, fine stores in the Delaware Valley.